Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, does borderline personality disorder affect one's ability to recognize facial expressions? If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. That way you won't miss anything new. Now, when we talk about borderline personality disorder, we know there are a number of key characteristics associated with it, and one of those is a difficulty with interpersonal relationships. And a lot of times we do think of this as a defining feature of borderline personality disorder. We also know that correctly recognizing facial expressions, being able to accurately identify the emotions associated with them, is important to interpersonal relationships. So it makes sense to have this hypothesis that with borderline personality disorder, there may be some type of impairment in recognizing facial expressions correctly, and this might lead to some of the problems with interpersonal relationships. Now, we know from the research that this idea is generally supported. We've identified deficits in recognizing neutral and ambiguous facial expressions with individuals with borderline personality disorder. We also see that many articles have this element of bias indicated as well, and particularly a negative bias. So it's not just an inability to recognize the facial expressions, it's adding something negative into those facial expressions that wasn't actually there. There is evidence that suggests that this deficit in recognizing facial expressions associated with borderline personality disorder is for all of the facial expressions, although some articles indicate that this impairment seems to be especially evident for anger and disgust. So a lot of times here when we talk about facial expressions, of course we're talking about recognition and not necessarily the intensity. There was a study published in 2016 by Tomei and colleagues that looked at this intensity element, specifically related to anger and happiness and ambiguous facial expressions. And there were some interesting findings here. Individuals with borderline personality disorder had lower intensity ratings for happiness when looking at happy facial expressions, but there was no difference when evaluating angry facial expressions. This was a bit of a surprise. Also in this study, individuals with borderline personality disorder had lower confidence in all of their assessments of facial expressions, but especially those for the happy facial expressions. Also, this lower confidence was linked to increased feelings of loneliness and an increased expectation of social rejection. They also looked at how an angry mood might affect the ratings of these different facial expressions, and they found that an increase in angry mood worsened the judgment for happiness, but not for anger. And again, this was an unexpected finding. Other studies have shown that individuals with borderline personality disorder are sensitive to angry stimuli. This study didn't find that. So how can we apply the findings from the study? How is this useful in the world of mental health treatment? Well, the findings from this study really tell us that individuals with borderline personality disorder, when they're in an argument with another individual, may have a compromised ability to detect signals that the other individual is trying to end the argument, like signals of cooperation, for example. So when an argument would naturally have less intensity, when it would be dissolving, that individual with borderline personality disorder wouldn't be able to see those signals and therefore wouldn't respond in a way to help that argument to end. So here we may see one piece of the puzzle that helps explain this relationship between borderline personality disorder and difficulty with interpersonal relationships. I hope you found this description of borderline personality disorder and the recognition of facial expressions to be interesting. Thanks for watching.